Rex, thanks so much for joining. Very, very excited to talk to you today about follow-up for sales, emails, what have you. Look, this whole video series, we've been talking a lot about follow-ups. Everyone has their own unique approach, angle, and we've learned a lot about the differences, different styles, and what gets results. Rex Biberston is from the sales developers. I could talk a lot about you, but I would love for you to kind of introduce yourself and tell us about your sales experience.
Yeah, sure. So right now I'm the head of operations for the sales developers, and we help companies double and triple revenue without doubling or tripling headcount. So that's our big focus right now. But over the last few years, I've spent a lot of time working with sales acceleration technology. I was you might call me an early employee. I was probably employee 350 at InsideSales.com right before we went up in the next year to like 700 employees. So I saw some really high growth at a really cool company doing some great things in the sales space. So I've had the chance to interact with a lot of these technologies that help us with follow-up, that create opportunities to turn a process, put it into a technology. So happy to be here and to chat about this with you.
Awesome. So let's start with the basics. Do you have a follow-up philosophy or techniques, or you have an approach that you like to use?
So actually, Ryan Reiser, my co-founder, and I, before we started our company, we wrote a book called Outbound Sales No Fluff, and we kind of lay out our methodology for sales in general is a bucketing strategy. So, we think of it in 4 buckets, and the top bucket drips down to the next and to the next. And so follow up from like a cold outbound perspective, if we're talking about that, we believe in following up with the most valuable opportunities first, and then working our way backwards into filling the next bucket and so on. So that's kind of how we think about follow-up. But if you're talking about somebody where we've already had a great conversation, maybe there's even a sales opportunity, the follow-up strategy for me centers around the right channel of communication. So where did we actually engage with them initially? What are they most interested in engaging on? And as far as the platform, so maybe we connect over LinkedIn and then email. I may not call you as my first strategy for follow-up. I may focus more heavily on those channels where I know you spend the most time. So yeah, we focus on channel as kind of like our key way to optimize.
Gotcha. So kind of figuring out what channel they're most active on, and then the ones you've communicated on, then go from there. What about the folks that don't reply? Like what you've sent a couple emails. You sent an email. You've got nothing. What's your approach and kind of the messaging after that?
So again, if we're talking about cold, are we talking about like, strategy follow-up on somewhere we've already had an opportunity?
Let's talk about the cold first.
Sure. So for cold, we're very phone heavy. We're phone first, in fact. So, in terms of experimenting with what channels work, I think for us, if we've sent out a couple of emails and haven't gotten a response, we're going to pick up the phone again. We're going to continue to try and reach somebody live because it creates a better opportunity for a conversation. And we think that sales really starts with a conversation. It can be on different channels, but a lot of the times you're interrupting their day. You're forcing them to at least give you a little bit of information like, hey, why aren't we having a conversation? Why isn't this happening? Is it just not worth your time? When's a good time to follow up with you? It gives you an opportunity to really gauge that in a more live discussion. So typically we pick up the phone and try and have a conversation.
Gotcha. And so when you do that approach, so are you starting with a phone call and then kind of email is another option, or are you starting with email and then phone?
We're very multi-channel, so we believe in testing. So there's no guarantee, and it depends on like the clients that we work with. They sell to all kinds of different companies and leadership at those companies. So for some companies, that might make a lot of sense to use social media as a key touch for engagement and for follow-up, because you spend a lot of time there. But if your target market's not on social, it doesn't do any good. So we'll test. We'll put phone first, followed by email. So if we place an initial call and don't reach someone, we'll send an email right behind it. Then the next couple of days, we'll keep calling, and then we'll send a follow-up email. Whereas most people, these days that are trying to like hack their way to the top will just send emails, and it's getting harder and harder as more people send more and more emails to stand out in that inbox. We believe, hey, throwing that additional touch of making those calls, trying to follow up, gain those conversations. So we do both. Yeah, it's definitely multi-channel.
Love it. Yeah. And I think the approach of like, when you do a phone call and you can follow up and the anchor based off that, now you're not just sending a, hey, just wanted to follow up email. You're
Yep.
sending I tried to call you, try to connect, put some effort into it. So that's awesome. So let's switch gears for a second to the folks that are like, they're interested, they're hot leads or they're leads. They've had a couple conversations, but now they've gone MIA or like they've just not responded, right? So
Yeah.
how do you go about doing follow-ups for those guys?
A lot of the time, because we know that they're the more engaged buyers, we're going to spend more time on their follow-up. So we'll spend, first of all, more time customizing it. Second of all, we'll throw in like a Vidyard Go video. We'll actually do very personalized, like instead of just writing a bunch of text and looking like every other email in their inbox, we'll throw in the video into the email to show them like, hey, we took time out of our day. Remember, we're the people, we're the human beings that you remember talking to the other day. So we'll add that to our follow-up strategy as well.
I love that. And yeah, the video part is key. I think there's Vidyard, Vistia, Soapbox is also another option. You can even just do straight like Loom videos, right?
Yeah.
So many free options out there, and then they have like a paid tier. But I love the fact that you said humanizing. I think that's very, very key because, I think so many people like telemarketers have gotten like, have ruined the like human side of things from reading from a script. And just, that you can tell they're kind of not thinking about it to where when you're actually following up and you're persistent, there is a human being behind it. So that's awesome.
Yeah, it's funny. We use a lot of scripting. And in fact, we build a lot of scripting. But the key to a script is really that you open a conversation. If your script is just super rote and you don't ever listen back and that listening doesn't change what you're about to say next, then you're going to get replaced by automation and technology like that. But that ability to turn that, standard opener into a real conversation with another human being and understand what their needs and their wants and their desires are, that makes you an incredible salesperson and valuable for years and years to come.
Awesome. I love that. That's it. That's really, really important. Like, I think that like leaving the space and then having that conversation. Cause I think so many of these cold calls are so focused on like getting the deal. And it's like,
Call it going for the throat. Yeah.
Yeah. Whenever does somebody buy an average, contract value of $100 or $500 or more in an instant, right? Like if I'm buying like a car, I'm going to think about it for a couple days, maybe going to go back and forth. And then when I talk to a salesperson, I may buy if it's a good deal. Right. So like, I like to think about the marketing side of the thing too, right? It's like, sales and marketing, I think of they're really the same thing. It's just when you have sales, you have that feedback loop and whatnot. So it's just, you have to reiterate and give them time to process.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, regarding, the different types, we talked a little bit about like phone call, omni-channel conversations, human side of things. But like when you're dealing with like small price services or like, let's say a high price enterprise sale, what is there a difference in approach and meant like the philosophy behind the follow-up?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the greater the value of the relationship, the more time you can afford to spend following up at a really high touch, high quality engagement, right? Like I cannot afford to send even a 30-second video to every prospect who opened my email twice if there's 10,000 of those and they're worth potentially $50. Like I can't spend that much time. But if there's 10 accounts that I'm trying to break into, just 10, like let's say I'm really high level enterprise sales rep, I'm working multiple angles. So I may not just follow up with one person. I'm going to follow up with the person lateral from them or above or beneath them in the org chart. I'm going to do, like my old business partner, Spencer Candy, used to call it surrounding the target, right? Like I'll take the time to really understand that account from a more holistic point of view, and follow-up becomes engaging with more people than that initial, prospective customer.
That makes sense. Yeah, absolutely. I think there's different touches or different kind of level of effort you can put into each individual one. So that's been very helpful. I think this has been very, very insightful. What didn't I ask you? Like, what are the things that like around follow-up or sales that I haven't talked about?
Sure. I think the biggest failure point for follow-up with salespeople is that they just don't do it.
Yeah.
Like all these strategies aside, if you're not doing it, period, you're missing the biggest opportunity. When we talk about bucketing, the fourth bucket is people who've set appointments with you. The people who are engaged, people who are closest to closing. If you're not following up and confirming those opportunities are going to happen, you're not spending the time to make sure that stuff actually occurs, then all the top of funnel activity you can do above it is wasted because you're just going to continue to have leakage. And so you need to spend your time following up with the accounts that are most valuable, that are closest to that conversion point. But it's also, it's just critical to do the follow-up, to not start by, a lot of sales reps, and this is true of individual sales reps especially, who are just responsible for their day. They're just mandated like, hey, make 100 calls. It's the worst thing I could hear is like, hey, yeah, Rex, like I could use some help. My boss wants me to make 100 calls. It's like, okay, but to whom and why? I'd rather you make 10 calls to people you've already spoken with than 100 calls to people you've never talked to. So focusing on actually doing the follow-up first, right? Because that's more important than net new.
Yeah.
And then following up with those most valuable accounts.
Absolutely. I think that's really, really key. So I have one last question for you. I've been asking everybody this. Is there a number of follow-ups that you like to go after? Like, is it like 10 follow-ups? You never stop, 3? I don't know. Is there something that you use or rule that you have?
It's a good question. Steli Efti, I read his book on follow-up and I really love his stuff. I think his strategy was like, look, there's a certain number, maybe 3 or 5. There's a certain number of touches in the beginning. But once somebody has expressed interest, there's no point that's too far until they tell you no. And I kind of subscribe to that philosophy. Like, look, if we agreed at some point initially that there's value in the conversation between the two of us, I owe it to you to continue until you tell me not to. And if it's just because you're busy, like I'm doing you a favor, I'm doing you a service, I'm doing the right thing by you as a prospective customer to come back to you over and over again until it's the right time for you to engage with me. So I'd say, yeah, initially I'm doing maybe 10 to 12 touches on a prospect to get a hold of them, maybe a little bit higher. But you can go much, much, much further if you know that there's value there and you know that that's something that would be beneficial to them.
Absolutely. That's super key. I think I run a marketing agency as well called Web Profits. And when we brought on, so I used to be doing the sales and I never followed up. Like I followed up a couple of times, right? When we brought on a salesperson, same pitch, same everything. The only difference is his sole job was to sell. So he followed up and we saw, I think, a 3x improvement in the deals we closed. And all he did was to grab an extra 100K in revenue in the first month he started, was like followed up with every single one of my existing contacts and generated like 3-4 deals.
Yeah, I think the phrase that I hope is like inscribed on my tombstone when I die is it's not their job to buy from you, it's your job to sell to them. So I think that's what reminds us for follow-up is like, it's not their job to follow up with you, it's your job to go back to them. So.
Absolutely. That's super key. So thanks again, Rex. Where can people find you? Where do they go for more information?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. I love spending time on there, sharing what I know, sharing what I'm experiencing with current clients, things that are going well, things that are going poorly, right? So LinkedIn is a great place, but also you can reach me at thesalesdevelopers.com or you can email me rex@thesalesdevelopers.com.
Awesome. Thanks for joining and take care.
Yeah, thank you.